The distress call opened a door to humanity's deadliest forces. Part 1. The Valorian science vessel Pale Harmony was dying in the cold darkness of the Korath Nebula, and Ambassador Sylphan could feel every shudder of the wounded ship through the metal floor beneath his clawed feet. He stood in the command center, his tall insectoid body swaying as another explosion rocked the vessel, and his four eyes watched the damage reports scroll across the flickering screens with growing despair. The ship had been on a simple survey mission to the edge of what the Galactic Concord called quarantine space, a vast region of stars that the elder races had avoided for over 200 years. And now that simple mission had turned into a nightmare. Ambassador, called out Captain Vorath, a fellow Valorian whose wings were pressed flat against her back in fear. The Keth Raiders have disabled our engines and our shields are failing. Sylphan turned to look at the tactical display, where 5 red dots circled their position like predators waiting for wounded prey to fall. And he felt his antennae droop with the weight of what he was about to authorize. The Keth Dominion were slavers and pirates who operated in the lawless regions between Concord space and the unknown territories, and they had no mercy for those they captured, selling their victims to the highest bidder across a dozen black markets. How long until Concord rescue ships can reach us? Sylphan asked, though he already knew the answer would bring no comfort. 17 standard hours at minimum, the communications officer replied, her voice trembling, and the Keth will breach our hull in less than 1. Sylphan closed his primary eyes and drew a deep breath through his spiracles, knowing that what he was about to do violated every protocol the Galactic Concord had established, but also knowing that his crew of 43 souls would die, or worse if he did nothing. Open a distress call on all frequencies, he commanded. And the bridge fell silent as every officer turned to stare at him. Ambassador, Captain Vorath whispered. All frequencies would include the channels that reach into quarantine space. And you know the Concord has forbidden any contact with that region. I know exactly what I am doing, Sylphan replied, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his thorax. And I would rather face the Concord's judgment than watch my people dragged away in chains. The communications officer hesitated for only a moment before her training took over, and she broadcast the distress signal into the void, a desperate cry for help that spread outward in all directions. Like ripples in a dark pond, for several long minutes nothing happened, and the Keth Raiders began their final approach, their weapons charging for the killing blow that would leave the Pale Harmony helpless and ready for boarding. Then, something changed on the sensors, something that made the tactical officer gasp and lean closer to her screen as if she could not believe what she was seeing. Ambassador, I am detecting a ship emerging from the nebula, and it is not of any design in our database. Sylphan rushed to the screen and felt his blood run cold at what he saw. For the vessel that appeared on their sensors was unlike anything the Galactic Concord had ever built, where Concord ships were elegant and curved, designed to flow through space like creatures of grace and beauty. This vessel was blocky and angular, covered in thick armor plates and bristling with weapons that looked crude but terrifyingly effective. The ship was painted in colors of gray and black, with strange symbols on its hull that no translator could read. And across its bow was written a name in an alien language that would soon become known across the galaxy: UNSC Fenris. Search and rescue. What is that thing? Captain Vorath breathed, her wings fluttering with nervous energy, before anyone could answer. The communications console crackled to life with a voice that spoke in heavily accented but understandable Galactic Common. And the words that came through would change everything. Sylphan thought he knew about the universe. Valorian vessel Pale Harmony. This is Captain Elena Vance of the United Nations Space Command frigate Fenris, and we have received your distress call. Please confirm your status and the nature of your emergency. Sylphan found himself unable to speak for a moment, his mind racing with the implications of what was happening, because he knew with sudden terrible certainty exactly what had answered their call. The quarantine zone had been established 2 centuries ago when Concord scouts first discovered a species on a small blue world in an unremarkable solar system. A species that had horrified the elder races so completely that they voted unanimously to seal away that entire region of space and pretend it did not exist. The species was called humanity, and they were considered too dangerous, too violent, and too unpredictable to ever be allowed contact with civilized space. Now one of their ships hung in the void before him, waiting for an answer. "This is Ambassador Sylvan of the Galactic Concord," he finally managed to say. "And we are under attack by Keth Dominion raiders who intend to capture us for the slave markets. We have 43 souls aboard and no way to defend ourselves." There was a pause that seemed to last forever. And then Captain Vance spoke again, her voice carrying a tone that Sylvan had never heard before. Something cold and hard like metal being sharpened for war. "Understood, Ambassador. Keep your people away from the outer hull, and do not be alarmed by what happens next." "What do you mean?" Sylvan asked, but the human had already cut the channel on the tactical display. The strange angular ship began to move, not away from the danger as any sane vessel would do when outnumbered 5-1, but directly toward the Keth raiders with a speed that seemed almost eager. The lead Keth cruiser opened the channel and broadcast a warning in their harsh, guttural language, demanding that the unknown vessel stand down and surrender or be destroyed. The human ship did not respond with words. Instead, the Fenris lit up with weapons fire that turned the darkness of space into a storm of light and death. And Ambassador Sylvan watched with 4 wide eyes as the universe he thought he understood began to shatter around him. The door to quarantine space had been opened, and something was coming through. The distress call opened the door to humanity's deadliest forces, Part 2. The first Keth cruiser exploded before its crew even understood what was happening. Torn apart by a weapon that Ambassador Sylvan had never seen before in all his years of diplomatic service across the Galactic Concord, the human ship had fired what looked like solid metal rods at incredible speed. And these rods had punched through the Keth shields as if they were made of paper, ripping through armor and reactor cores with brutal efficiency. "By the ancestors," Captain Vorth whispered, her compound eyes reflecting the fire that bloomed in the darkness. What kind of weapon was that? Sylvan had no answer, because nothing in the Concord arsenal worked like what he had just witnessed. And he found himself gripping the console with trembling claws as the battle continued to unfold. The remaining 4 Keth raiders scattered like startled prey animals, their formation breaking apart as they tried to put distance between themselves and this terrifying newcomer. But the human vessel called Fenris was faster than anything that size had any right to be captain. Elena Vance had not spoken again since cutting communications. But Sylvan could see her ship moving with a purpose that spoke of calm and calculated violence. Hunting each Keth vessel with patient determination, the second raider tried to flee toward the edge of the nebula, pushing its engines beyond safe limits in desperate hope of escape. But the Fenris adjusted its course with smooth precision and fired. Again this time, Sylvan saw the weapons clearly on his sensors. Long metal projectiles accelerated to speeds that made them glow white-hot, and they struck the fleeing ship in its engine section with devastating accuracy. The raider did not explode immediately, but its engines died, and it began to drift, helpless and crippled. No longer a threat to anyone. They disabled it, the tactical officer said with wonder in her voice. They could have destroyed it, but they chose to disable it instead. The 3rd and 4th raiders made a different choice, turning to face the human ship and charging forward with all weapons blazing, clearly deciding that their only hope was to overwhelm this strange enemy with combined firepower. Sylvan watched missiles and plasma bolts streaked toward the Fenris. Enough firepower to destroy a Concorde battlecruiser twice over. And he felt his heart clench with unexpected concern for the humans who had come to help them. Then something incredible happened. The human ship seemed to come alive with smaller weapons. Dozens of rapid-fire turrets that tracked each incoming missile and bolt with impossible speed, filling the space around the Fenris with a web of defensive fire that destroyed everything before it. Could hit point defense systems? Sylvan murmured, recognizing the concept but stunned by the execution. But the tracking speed is beyond anything we thought possible. The two attacking raiders suddenly found themselves with empty weapons and a very angry human ship bearing down on them. And what happened next would give Sylvan nightmares for years to come. The Fenris did not simply fire its main weapons again. Instead, it closed the distance with terrifying speed and then launched something from its hull. Small pods that rocketed toward the Keth ships faster than the eye could follow. What are those? Captain Varth asked. Answer came seconds later when the pods struck the Keth hulls and burned through the armor with bright cutting flames. And then figures in bulky armored suits poured through the breaches into the enemy ship's human soldier. Sylvan amplified the sensor readings and watched with horrified fascination as the armored humans moved through the Keth vessels with coordinated precision, their weapons firing in short controlled bursts that dropped Keth warriors before they could even raise their own guns. The communications console picked up fragments of human speech, short clipped words that meant nothing to the translator but carried a tone of professional calm that was somehow more frightening than screaming battle cries. Would have been corridor clear. Moving to engineering. 2 hostiles down, continuing sweep. Bridge secured. Ship is ours. In less than 10 minutes, both Keth raiders had been captured. Their crews either dead or restrained. And the armored human soldiers were reporting success to their captain, as if this had been nothing more than a routine exercise. The Baya, 5th and final Keth raider, had used the chaos to charge its jump drive. And Sylvan saw it preparing to flee into faster-than-light travel, where no weapon could follow. But the Fenris had seen it too. And one final railgun shot crossed the void to strike the raider just as its jump drive activated. And the ship vanished in a flash of tortured physics that left nothing behind but scattered atoms. Then there was silence. The battle was over. And where 5 Keth raiders had once circled like hungry predators, now there was only debris and 2 captured ships and the angular gray form of the human vessel that had saved them all. The communications console crackled again, and Captain Vance spoke in that same calm voice as before. Though Sylvan thought he detected something that might have been warmth beneath the professional tone. Ambassador Sylvan, this is Captain Vance. The hostile vessels have been neutralized, and you are no longer in danger. Do you require medical assistance or engineering support? Sylvan found that his voice would not work at first, and he had to clear his throat twice before he could respond. His mind still struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Captain Vance, he finally said, I do not know how to thank you for what you have done. And I confess that I do not understand why you came to help us when we called. There was a pause. And when the human spoke again, her voice carried a note of confusion, as if the answer should have been obvious. You called for help. Ambassador. We came. Sylvan felt something shift in his understanding of the universe, because those simple words carried a weight that he was only beginning to comprehend. The Galactic Concorde had quarantined humanity out of fear, convinced that such a violent species would only bring destruction to civilized space. But this human captain had risked her ship and her crew to save strangers from a species that had spent 2 centuries pretending humans did not exist. Permission to dock with your vessel. Sylvan heard himself saying, I believe we have much to discuss. Permission granted, Ambassador. We will extend our docking collar and have medical teams standing by. As the pale Harmony limped toward the human ship on its last functioning thrusters, Sylphan stared at the strange angular vessel and wondered how everything the Concord believed about humanity could have been so completely wrong. The door to quarantine space was open now, and there was no closing it again. The distress call opened a door to humanity's deadliest forces. Part 3. Ambassador Sylphan had visited hundreds of alien vessels during his long career with the Galactic Concord, but nothing had prepared him for what he found aboard the human ship, Fenris. The docking collar connected with a heavy metallic clang that echoed through both ships. And when the airlock opened, Sylphan stepped into a world that felt completely different from anything he had known. The air was thicker than he expected, rich with oxygen and carrying strange scents that his translator identified as coffee and machine oil and something called bacon. And the gravity was stronger too, pulling at his limbs with a force that made every step feel like a small battle. A human woman stood waiting for him. And Sylphan realized with a start that this must be Captain Elena Vance herself. She was shorter than he had expected, barely reaching his chest in height, but she carried herself with an authority that made her seem much larger. And her eyes were the gray of storm clouds with lines around them that spoke of many years and many hard decisions. One of her arms was not flesh but metal, a cybernetic replacement that moved with smooth mechanical precision. And Sylphan found himself wondering what battle had cost her the original limb. "Ambassador Sylphan," she said, extending her flesh hand in what his translator told him was a human greeting gesture. "Welcome aboard the Fenris." Sylphan took her hand carefully, aware that his claws could easily cut her soft skin, and was surprised by the strength of her grip despite her small size. "Captain Vance," he replied, "I find myself without adequate words to express my gratitude for what you and your crew have done." Vance smiled, and the expression transformed her weathered face into something almost warm, though the hardness never quite left her eyes. "You can thank me by joining me for a meal and a conversation, Ambassador. I suspect we both have questions that need answering." She led him through the corridors of the Fenris, and Sylphan observed everything with the careful attention of a trained diplomat, noting details that painted a picture of the species that had built this vessel. The walls were covered in photographs and paintings, images of green landscapes and blue oceans and cities that gleamed with lights. And among them were pictures of humans in groups, smiling and embracing each other in ways that spoke of deep bonds and affection. But there were other images too. Memorials to fallen crew members with their names and faces preserved in small shrines. And Sylphan noticed that the humans they passed would touch these shrines gently as they walked by, honoring their dead with quiet respect. "You are a search and rescue vessel," Sylphan said as they walked. "But you fight like a warship that was built for conquest," Vance laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the metal walls. "All human ships are warships, Ambassador. We learned long ago that the universe does not reward those who cannot defend themselves. So even our rescue vessels carry enough firepower to make enemies regret their choices." They reached a small room that served as the captain's personal quarters, simply furnished with a desk and chairs and a window that looked out into the stars. And Vance gestured for Sylphan to sit while she prepared food and drink. "I know what your people call this region of space," she said as she worked. "Quarantine space, as if we were a disease that needed to be contained." Sylphan felt his antennae droop with shame, because he could not deny the truth of her words. "The Concord discovered your species 200 years ago," he said carefully. "And the elder races were frightened by what they found." "Frightened of what, exactly?" Vance asked, setting a cup of dark liquid before him that his translator identified as Kufazilul, wrapped his claws around the warm cup and gathered his thoughts, knowing that what he said next might determine the future of relations between humanity and the Galactic Concord. "Your world was torn by constant war when we first observed it," he explained. Nations fighting nations, weapons that could destroy entire cities being tested and stockpiled. And the elder races believed that any species so dedicated to violence could never be trusted among civilized peoples. Van sat across from him and sipped her own coffee, her gray eyes studying him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under examination. "So you decided to lock us away and wait for us to destroy ourselves," she said. And her voice was calm but carried an edge of old anger beneath the surface. "That was the reasoning," Sylvan admitted. "The Concord believed that humanity would burn itself to ash within a generation or two, and then the quarantine could be lifted safely. But we did not burn," Van said. And now her smile had no warmth in it at all. "We learned instead." She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the stars with her metal arm clasped behind her back. "Humanity has always been at war, Ambassador, with nature and with each other and with ourselves. And you are right that we nearly destroyed our own world more than once through our violence and our foolishness." She turned to face him, and Sylvan saw something in her eyes that he had never seen in any species before. A fire that burned with fierce and stubborn determination. But we survived. And every war taught us something. Every disaster made us stronger. And when we finally united and reached for the stars, we carried all those hard lessons with us. "What lessons?" Sylvan asked, genuinely curious despite his fear. Vance returned to her seat and leaned forward, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. "That the universe is cruel and does not care about fairness or justice. That the only ones who will protect your people are your own people. And that when someone calls for help in the darkness, you answer the call no matter the cost." She gestured toward the window where the stars gleamed like scattered diamonds. "Your Concord left us alone for 2 centuries, Ambassador, and in that time we built fleets and colonized worlds and became something that your elder races could never have imagined. What did you become?" Sylvan whispered. Vance smiled again, and this time the expression was almost sad. "We became a species that turns our rescue ships into warships, our doctors into soldiers, and our teachers into warriors. Because we know that peace is only possible when you are strong enough to defend it." She reached across the table and placed her flesh hand over his clawed one, a gesture of connection that crossed the vast gulf between their species. "You called for help, Sylvan, and we came because that is who we are. And now the door between our peoples has been opened, and nothing will ever be the same again." Sylvan looked into her gray eyes and felt the weight of history pressing down upon him, knowing that the choice he made in the next few moments would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The quarantine was over, and humanity was ready to step through the door. The distress call opened a door to humanity's deadliest forces, Part 4. The warning came 3 days after the battle, when the sensors of the Fenris detected a massive energy signature approaching the Korath Nebula at faster-than-light speeds. Ambassador. Sylvan was in the medical bay visiting his injured crew members when Captain Vance found him, and the look on her face told him that their brief moment of peace was about to end. "The Keth Dominion is coming," she said without any greeting or soft words. "And they are bringing a war fleet." Sylvan felt his blood turn cold in his veins because he knew what this meant. And he rose from beside the bed of his wounded communications officer with dread settling in his heart. "How many ships?" he asked, though part of him did not want to know the answer. "Our long-range sensors count 40 vessels," Vance replied. "Cruisers and destroyers, and at least 3 capital ships that my tactical officer identifies as Keth dreadnoughts. 40 ships against 1. And the Fenris was not even a true warship, but a rescue frigate that had already expended much of its ammunition in the previous battle." Sylvan looked at the human captain and saw no fear in her gray eyes, only calm calculation and something that might have been anticipation. "You cannot fight 40 ships," he said carefully. Even your remarkable vessel cannot survive those odds, Man smiled. And the expression reminded Sylvan of a predator that had just spotted prey walking into a trap. No. Ambassador, I cannot fight 40 ships alone, she agreed. Which is why I sent a message to my people, the moment the first Keth raider fired on your vessel 3 days ago, before Sylvan could ask what she meant. The tactical alarm began to wail throughout the Fenris, and both of them rushed to the bridge where the crew was already at battle stations. The main view screen showed the HFY War fleet dropping out of faster than light travel. 40 ships arranged in a massive formation that blotted out the stars behind them. And at their head flew the flagship of War Prince Korvax, the most feared military commander in the Keth Dominion human vessel. The communications officer reported, "We are receiving a transmission from the Keth flagship. Put it through," Vance ordered. Settling into her command chair with the calm of someone who had faced death many times before, the screen flickered and showed the face of War Prince Korvax, a massive Keth warrior with tusks that curved up past his small cruel eyes and ritual scars that covered his gray skin like a map of past victories. "Human," he growled, his voice thick with contempt and rage. "You have destroyed ships of the Dominion and killed warriors under my command. And for this insult you will die screaming in the void." Vance leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs, her posture so relaxed that she might have been discussing the weather with an old friend. "War Prince Korvax," she replied pleasantly, "I was hoping you would come yourself. It saves me the trouble of hunting you down later." Korvax laughed, a harsh barking sound that made Sylvan flinch. "You are outnumbered 40-1, human, and yet you speak of hunting me?" He leaned forward, his eyes burning with bloodlust. "I will tear your ship apart piece by piece and feast on your flesh while you still breathe. That is a very detailed threat," Vance said, still smiling. "But I am afraid you have made a mistake in your counting." She turned to her tactical officer and nodded once. "Signal the fleet. Lieutenant, tell Admiral Cole that playtime is over, behind the Keth formation." Space itself seemed to tear open as dozens of blue-white rifts appeared in the fabric of reality. And from those rifts emerged ships that made the Fenris look like a child's toy. Sylvan counted them with growing disbelief as they poured through the dimensional gates. Massive carriers that stretched kilometers from bow to stern. Bristling dreadnoughts covered in weapon batteries. Sleek destroyers that moved in perfect formation. And bomber wings that swarmed like angry insects around their motherships. The UNSC 7th Expeditionary Fleet had arrived. And they had brought enough firepower to crack a planet. "War Prince Korvax," came a new voice over the communications channel, deep and cold as the void between stars. "This is Admiral Marcus Cole of the United Nations Space Command." The view screen split to show an older human male with silver hair and eyes that burned with controlled fury. And Sylvan noticed that Korvax had gone very still, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. "Your raiders attacked a vessel under the protection of the UNSC," Admiral Cole continued. "And you have brought a war fleet to finish what your pirates started." He leaned forward, and his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You hurt ours, Korvax. Now we hurt you." The Keth War Prince opened his mouth to respond, perhaps to offer surrender or perhaps to spit defiance. But he never got the chance. Admiral Cole made a single cutting gesture with his hand, and the UNSC fleet opened fire. Sylvan had thought the weapons of the Fenris were impressive, but they were nothing compared to the apocalyptic fury that the 7th Fleet unleashed upon the Keth formation. Railgun rounds, the size of ground vehicles, tore through shields and armor. Nuclear-tipped missiles detonated in blinding flashes that consumed entire ships. And coordinated fighter wings swept through the chaos, cutting down any vessel that tried to flee. Keth attempted to fight back, their own weapons blazing desperately against the human assault. but their shots either missed or were absorbed by shields that held firm against everything thrown at them. One by one, the Keth ships died, crushed by overwhelming firepower and superior tactics. And War Prince Korvax watched his proud war fleet crumble around him. The battle lasted 11 minutes when it was over. 36 Keth ships had been destroyed, and 4 more had been captured. Their crews taken prisoner by human Marines who swept through the vessels with brutal efficiency. The Keth flagship was one of the captured vessels, and War Prince Korvax himself was dragged from his command chair in restraints, his tusks shattered and his pride broken. The UNSC had not lost a single ship. Admiral Cole appeared on the view screen once more, his expression showing neither triumph nor satisfaction, only the grim determination of a man who had done what needed to be done. "Captain Vance," he said, "secure the area and prepare the ambassador for transport. I believe he has a message to deliver to the Galactic Concord." Vance saluted crisply, then turned to look at Sylphan with eyes that held something that might have been hope. "Well?" "Ambassador," she said softly, "I think it is time for your people to meet mine." Sylphan could only nod, his mind still reeling from what he had witnessed, knowing that the report he would bring to the Concord would change the galaxy forever. The distress call opened a door to humanity's deadliest forces. Part 5. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Concord had not seen such chaos in living memory, as representatives from 100 different species shouted and argued and demanded answers that Ambassador Sylphan was still struggling to provide. He stood at the central podium where diplomats had spoken for thousands of years, his insectoid body tired from the long journey home and his mind heavy with the weight of what he had witnessed in the Korath. "Nebula, order," called the High Speaker, an ancient being of crystalline form whose voice rang through the chamber like struck bells. "We will have order in this assembly." The shouting died down slowly as the gathered representatives remembered their dignity. Though Sylphan could see fear and anger and disbelief written on faces of every shape and color throughout the massive room. "Ambassador Sylphan," the High Speaker continued once silence had fallen, "you claim that you made contact with the quarantined species known as humanity, and that they destroyed a Keth war fleet of 40 vessels in a matter of minutes. I do not claim it, High Speaker," Sylphan replied, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "I witnessed it with my own eyes, and the sensor logs from my vessel confirm every detail of my report." A Keth representative rose from her seat in the back of the chamber, her gray face twisted with fury. "This is an act of war," she bellowed. "The humans have attacked our dominion without provocation, and the Concord must respond with force." "Without provocation?" Sylphan turned to face her, feeling a spark of anger ignite in his thorax. "Your raiders attacked my vessel in neutral space, killed members of my crew, and intended to sell the survivors as slaves." He gestured toward the sensor logs that floated in holographic display above the podium. "The humans responded to a distress call. Representative, they came to save strangers who had done nothing for them. And when your war prince brought a fleet to take revenge, they defended us again." The Keth representative snarled but had no response, and she slowly sank back into her seat as murmurs spread through the chamber. An elder of the Vorn species, beings of living light who were among the founding members of the Concord, drifted forward to address the assembly. The quarantine was established to protect civilized space from a dangerous and violent species, they said, their voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "And what you describe only confirms our fears. These humans destroyed 40 ships without losing any of their own, which proves they are exactly the threat we believe them to be." Sylphan shook his head slowly, knowing that this was the argument he would have to overcome if anything was to change. "I thought the same way when I first saw them fight," he admitted. "I watched them tear through the Keth with terrifying efficiency, and I wondered if we had made a terrible mistake by opening communications. He paused, gathering his thoughts, remembering the conversations he had shared with Captain Vance and the things he had learned aboard the Fenris. But then I spent time among them, High Speaker. I walked their corridors and shared their meals and spoke with their captain about their history and their values. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, conviction building with every word. Yes, humans are violent. They have fought countless wars among themselves and nearly destroyed their own world more than once. But that violence is not all they are. He activated another holographic display, showing images he had recorded during his time on the human vessel. They keep pictures of their loved ones on their walls. They mourn their fallen with shrines and ceremonies. They laugh and sing and create art that speaks of hope and love and dreams of a better tomorrow. The image is shifted to show the human medical teams treating the wounded, Valorians, gentle hands and kind faces working to save lives that meant nothing to them except that they were lives worth saving. When I asked Captain Vance why she came to help us, she did not speak of politics or advantage or territorial expansion. Sylphan continued. She simply said that we called for help, and they came. He looked out across the grand chamber, meeting the eyes of as many representatives as he could. We locked them away for 200 years because we were afraid of what they might become. And in that time, they became exactly what we feared. But also so much more. His voice dropped to something almost gentle, though it carried to every corner of the massive room. They became a species that builds warships to rescue strangers, that fights with terrible fury but offers mercy to the defeated, that answers distress calls from the very civilization that tried to pretend they did not exist. The Vorn elder flickered with uncertain light, their earlier confidence wavering. What would you have us do, Ambassador? They asked. The quarantine has stood for 2 centuries, and to end it now would be to admit that we were wrong. We were wrong, Sylphan said simply. And it is time we admitted it. He transmitted a final file to the central display, a formal request written in human script alongside a translation in Galactic. Common. The United Nations Space Command has asked for a seat at the Concord table, he explained. Not as conquerors or as supplicants, but as equals who wish to stand beside us rather than against us. The chamber erupted in arguments once more, but Sylphan noticed that the tone had changed, and the fear that had dominated the early discussions was now mixed with something that might have been hope. They came when we called, he said one final time, raising his voice above the chaos. They bled for us when they owed us nothing. He paused, letting his words sink into the assembled representatives. If this is what humanity offers its enemies, imagine what they offer their friends. The vote took 3 weeks of debate and negotiation, but in the end, the decision was made. The quarantine was lifted on the day that the first human delegation arrived at the Concord homeworld. Ambassador Sylphan stood at the spaceport alongside Captain Elena Vance, watching the sleek human shuttle descend through the golden clouds. Are you nervous? He asked her quietly. Vance smiled, her gray eyes reflecting the light of an alien sun. Terrified, she admitted. But that has never stopped us before. Sylphan made the clicking sound that served as Valorian laughter. No, he agreed. I do not suppose it has. The shuttle landed, the doors opened, and humanity stepped through the door at last across the galaxy. In 1,000 shadowed corners, where pirates and slavers and tyrants had once operated without fear, word spread of what had happened at the Korath Nebula. The humans were coming, and they answered distress calls. Nothing would ever be the same again.